Hello everybody and welcome to the Import-Export Hub channel. Bogdan here. I hope you're all doing great, and without losing precious time here guys, I will dive into today's subject and cover the imports and the exports of Morocco for 2020. Morocco, which is one of the top performers of the African continent, if you ask me, in terms of economic development, with a lot of diversified industrial activities taking place there. Mostly thanks to foreign direct investments, of course, and the pro-business approach of the local authorities. We have also Tanger Med port, who is a force to be reckoned with in the Mediterranean. So anyways, as my focus is on Morocco's foreign trade, that is imports and exports, as usual, I've prepared here an Excel file with these figures, and I also have the top 5 imports and exports in order to see who are the main trading partners for Morocco. And where possible, as always, I will give you some examples in order to see what really drives the exports or the imports to or from a particular country. So without further ado, I will start with Morocco's exports for 2020, which overall were down 6% compared to 2019. Bringing the total exported value to some $27.7 billion, with chapters 85, 87 and 31 driving Morocco's exports. All these three having a combined share of roughly 40%, which is kind of concentrated, but not that much. Other good performers in terms of exports are related to textiles, as we can see here, chapter 62. The fruit and vegetable exports are also very, very important drivers. But let's not forget the chemical sector with chapter 28. So inorganic chemicals with some $1.2 billion worth of exports for 2020. And a share in Morocco's overall exports of roughly 4%. In terms of year-on-year changes, I've said it previously, the total exports were down 6%. And in these top 10 sectors, except the fertilizers, fruits and fish sectors, we see here, who all had positive changes. With the rest of them, we have contractions ranging from, I don't know, minus 21%, as the case with the apparel sector, to some minus 6%, as in the case with the vegetables and automotive sectors. Now, moving on the import side, here we see how 2020 shrunk with almost 13% compared with the previous year, driven mainly to the heavy contractions in the mineral fuels and machinery sectors. In terms of imports, the biggest share is for chapter 27, so mineral fuels, as Morocco is a net importer. On the second spot, we have chapter 84, and on the third one, we have chapter 85, so electrical machinery and equipment, with some $4.6 billion worth of imports. Other big drivers are concerning cereals, as Morocco again is a net importer. Iron and steel sector is also a top performer with some $912 million worth of imports. And lastly, the 10th biggest import driver is the pharma sector, with some $759 million and a share in Morocco's total imports of some 1.7%. Relative to the year-on-year changes, except for the cereals and the pharma sectors, who both had increases, for the rest of them we have big contractions ranging from almost 50% to almost 1% for the articles of iron and steel sector, for example. And guys, before I finish the general imports here, I will briefly pass through Morocco's balance of trade here, which overall is red, with some $16.8 billion negative balance of trade. But in these top 10 sectors, we have two that are positive, although with relatively small amounts, if we're keeping the proportionals, of course. And these are chapters 85 and 88, the last one having almost $106 million positive trade balance. And now guys that I've covered also the general imports, I'll give you now the top 5 performers for each flow in order to see who are the main trading partners. And of course I will start with the export flow, chapter 85 being the first one. And well, here almost all the exports are towards Europe, with Spain, France, and Italy being the main trading partners, but there are other important ones outside Europe, like the United States or Singapore, for example, at least in this top 10 list. In terms of year-on-year changes, we have 3 countries or territories to which the exports were up compared with 2019, and these are Spain, Germany, and we have the third one, which is a little bit trickier, as we have areas not elsewhere specified, in which case we either have low trade value that was reported cumulatively by the Moroccan authorities, which I highly doubt it, or I don't know, the trading partner was unknown to the Moroccan authorities. Either way, it's interesting to see how from 2019 the exports towards areas not elsewhere specified skyrocketed, amounting in 2020 to some $97.6 million, up almost 7% in relative terms. As for the rest of the top 10 partners, well, we have contractions ranging from minus 13%, as is the case with Italy, to minus 52%, sorry, as in the case with the United Kingdom here. Relative to the main drivers, for Spain, the main export driver from this chapter was HS code 854430, so ignition wiring sets, and for the United States we have here transistors, so HS code 854129. Now moving to Morocco's biggest export driver for 2020, which is chapter 87. Here we clearly see how almost all the top 10 trading partners are located in Europe, the only country outside Europe being the United States. The main export destinations include, I don't know, countries like France, Spain, Italy, and Germany, but of course there are other important trading partners like, I don't know, Turkey, Poland, or Hungary, again, just to name a few. Now, in terms of year-on-year changes, except France, Turkey, and the United States, who all had positive changes, with the rest of them we have negative ones, ranging from, I don't know, 19%, minus 19% to minus 45%, as in the case with Poland, for example. As for the main drivers from this chapter, well, both Renault Group and the Stellantis Group have assembly plants in Morocco, so there is no brainer that cars from these two groups are driving most of the exports from Morocco towards France and Turkey here. Now guys, moving to Morocco's third biggest export driver, which is fertilizers. Here it strikes me to see that there is no so-called export clustering effect as we saw in the previous chapters, and we have a lot of countries from different regions of the world, with Brazil, India, and the United States driving most of the exports. But there are others like, I don't know, Argentina, Djibouti, or Bangladesh, again, just to name a few from this top 10 list. In terms of absolute values, the exports amounted to some $3.4 billion, which is was up 16% from 2019. And basically, this performance is reinforcing somehow the upward trend for this particular product. And except the United States, Turkey, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, who all had contractions in 2020, with the rest of the top 10 trading partners, we have positive changes, with India increasing its imports more than tenfold in 2020 compared with the previous year. And guys, my guess is that in 2020, with the Ukraine cutting off the fertilizers exports recently, I think that Morocco's fertilizer industry will gain a lot, and I do expect that Morocco's exports will be up, most probably achieving some double-digit growth, both in terms of value and weight. And here, in terms of drivers, I won't embarrass myself reading the complete description of the product, and I'll limit myself at reading the HS number, which is 310540. And with this chapter being also covered, I'll now move on to the fourth biggest export driver for Morocco, which is chapter 62. So articles of apparel, and again we see how the clustering effect takes place, and basically these top 10 trading partners, except of course Algeria, are located in Europe. In terms of absolute value, the exports amounted to some $1.9 billion, which was down 21% from 2019, with Spain, France, and Italy having some 80% share in Morocco's total exports. But there are, of course, other important partners like, I don't know, Portugal, the Netherlands, or Belgium, again, just to name a few from this list. Now, relative to the year-on-year changes, the exports towards Spain shrunk the most in absolute value, while in relative terms, those towards Algeria had the biggest change. But there were also positive changes as well in relation with Italy, for example, the Netherlands, Germany, or Belgium, who all imported more in 2020. And here I would like to make speculation regarding the small and medium companies in Europe involved in the apparel sector. And well, given the context of the current trade rates, I think that these small and medium companies from Europe will focus even more their attention on Morocco in 2020 in their nearshoring strategies. And I don't know, leave China and Southeast Asia altogether. Of course, Turkey is also another nearshoring option. But anyhow, until this speculation of mine is confirmed or not, I will give you also the main export drivers from this chapter, which for both Italy and the Netherlands is HS code 620342, so men's or boys' trousers and the like. And now finally, I will move to the fifth biggest export driver for Morocco, which is chapter 8, so edible fruits and nuts, which for 2020 performed pretty well, if you ask me. Was up 11% in relative terms compared with 2019. With Spain here, the Netherlands and France being the main trading partners, but there are other important ones like, I don't know, the Russian Federation, Canada, the United States, or Sweden, again, just to name a few. In terms of year-on-year changes, except Spain, the Russian Federation, we have also the United States and Sweden, who all had contractions. With the rest of the top 10 partners, we have positive changes ranging from, I don't know, 9% to 66%, as in the case with the United Kingdom, for example. And overall, the last 5-year trend is upwards, which could mean that Morocco is somehow becoming an export leader with clearly competitive advantages for this sector. And my guess is that the full potential in terms of output for this sector is far from being reached. As for the main export driver, guys, for both Canada and the United Kingdom, we're having HS code 080520, so fresh or dried mandarins, including tangerines, clementines, and other citrus varieties. And guys, with the top 5 export chapters being covered, I will now move on to the import flow. And I will begin with the first driver, which is, guess what? Mineral fuels and oils. As again, I've told you previously, Morocco is a net importer. And here we see that for 2020, it imported close to $5.3 billion, down almost 34% from 2019. with Spain, the Russian Federation, and the United States as the biggest suppliers. But of course, there are other important partners, mostly petroleum exporters like Algeria, Saudi Arabia, or the Netherlands, for example. Relative to the year-on-year changes here, as I've said it, the imports shrunk with a third, and we have negative values almost with all the top 10 partners, except maybe with the Russian Federation, Belgium, and France, who all had positive changes ranging from almost 32% to some 83%, as is the case with Belgium here. As for the main imported mineral fuels from this chapter, of course, for Spain, the main driver was medium oils and preparations, while from the Russian Federation, the main driver was coal. And here it should be very, very interesting to follow up how this particular trade, considering both the volume and the value, will develop given the sanctions imposed by Europe, the United States, and some other countries like Japan, South Korea, and Australia. And I'm expecting that this could be a good moment to stockpile as much as possible. But we will see together how this story will develop, and I'll move on to my second most important driver for Morocco's imports, which is machinery and mechanical appliances. And here the imported value is close to $5 billion, which is quite stable as it is close to the last 4 years average. This sector too was down as 2020, if you remember, was highly uncertain in terms of industrial production, investments, and so on. And we see some 11.5% contraction in the imports, with China, Spain, and France being the main trading partners. But there are other important ones like, I don't know, Turkey, Italy, the Czech Republic, or Japan, again, big exporters of machinery. Now, relative to the year-on-year changes, except China, Turkey, and Romania, who all had positive changes with the rest of the trading partners, at least from this top 10th list, we see negative values ranging from almost minus 1%, as in the case with the United States, to minus 26%, as in the case with Spain, for example. And relative to the main drivers, here I have two examples, and we have HS code 847130, so data processing machines driving most of the imports from China, and HS code 848180, so appliances for pipes, boiler shells, or tanks, driving most of Morocco's imports from the Czech Republic. Now, moving on to the third biggest import driver story, which is chapter 85. So another high added value chapter. We see that these two had a 7% contraction in 2020. But if you compare with the last 4 years, in terms of average value, you get right about the same value. So it's quite stable. Here we see that China again is the main partner with some $1.4 billion worth of exports towards Morocco. On the second place you have Spain, and on the third spot we have France with some $646 million worth of exports from this chapter. And relative to the year-on-year changes, the figures, at least for the top 10 ones, are almost all negative except with China and Hungary, who both experienced some growth. China doing particularly well, if you ask me, with the mobile phones driving most of the exports towards Morocco in 2020. As for Hungary, the second example here, well, the main exports towards Morocco were driven by generators used for internal combustion engines, so most probably these were needed on the assembly plants in Morocco. Now, moving on with Morocco's fourth biggest driver, which is chapter 87, so vehicles other than rolling stock and parts and accessories thereof. And as I've said it at the beginning, Morocco has quite a large manufacturing base in terms of automotive, so it needs also to import some of the parts and accessories in order to assemble them, and then of course export the vehicles mostly towards Europe with the car carriers. Relative to the absolute figures, the imported amount was close to $4 billion, and we have France, Germany, and Spain as the biggest trading partners. But there are other important ones like Turkey, Romania, or Poland, again, just to name a few from this top 10 list. And in terms of year-on-year changes, 2020 overall had some 22% contraction in terms of imports relative to the previous year, and we see here the negative figures. There were also some positive changes, and we have almost 29% positive change in relation with China, and some 3% positive change in relation with Poland. And guys, as for the main import drivers from Romania, the main driver was HS code 870710, so bodies for motor cars, and most probably here we have Renault Group with some intercompany transactions. And from China, the main import driver was HS code 871110, so motorcycles and scooters with a cubic capacity lower or equal to 50 cubic centimeters. And here I think that the Chinese manufacturers struggled with their cheap scooters, and I've prepared also a chart with the volume and the value of Morocco's imports from the last 5 years. From China, of course, and both in terms of quantity and volume, this grew quite a lot. And remember that all these imports will trigger multiplying effects in terms of after-sales service, or I don't know, parts or accessories. So I had to give it to the Chinese on how they've made a stronghold in Morocco, at least for this particular product. Now, moving on to the last chapter driving Morocco's imports, which is chapter 10. As I've said it, Morocco is a net importer of cereals, mostly wheat, as you can see here in the main driver column for both France and Ukraine. In 2020, the imported value reached almost $2.3 billion, with almost 42% change in relative terms, which is positively correlated with the change in the trading wheat price. So it grew in terms of value, but not necessarily in terms of volume. Here, France, Canada, and Argentina are the major suppliers, but there are other big wheat exporters out there supplying Morocco, like Ukraine, Brazil, the Russian Federation, or Poland, for example. And in terms of year-on-year changes, except Argentina and Brazil, with the rest of the top 10 partners, we have quite good performances, especially for France and Canada. Both in absolute and relative terms, and my guess is that, as in the case with the mineral fuels, this sector too is going to be affected heavily by the conflict in Ukraine. I don't know if you are aware, but Ukraine already halted the exports for wheat, and most probably Morocco's government strategic sourcing arm in charge with the wheat acquisition will have to look out there for other sources. There will be a lot of speculation on the international market. Most probably export quotas will be put in place by the big wheat producers. And sadly, the same goes for all African and Middle Eastern countries, heavily dependent on wheat imports, and it's going to be a very, very difficult period for all of us. But anyways, I hope that what I'm saying is not going to happen. And guys, leaving this pessimistic note behind, these were the imports and the exports for Morocco for 2020. Thank you all for watching. I really hope you've enjoyed it. And as usual, until next time, keep your business safe. Thanks.